The alien fighter demanded a duel with a human, but what happened next quieted her. The station hung in the middle of deep space, like a small metal moon. It had no name that most people used. Everyone just called it Concordia. It was a big orbital platform, wide and round, built by 7 different civilizations working together. It had long corridors, tall ceilings, and rooms that smelled like recycled air and something faintly metallic. It was not a beautiful place, but it was an important one. 7 species had come here to talk, not to fight, not to trade, but to build something together, a coalition, a shared agreement that would change how the galaxy worked. It had taken years of small meetings and careful messages just to get all 7 groups in the same place. And now they were here. And the talks had been going on for weeks. And things were moving slowly, the way important things usually do. The human delegation had arrived on a transport ship called the Alden Grey. There were 12 of them, diplomats, scientists, advisors, and 2 soldiers assigned as personal security. One of those soldiers was a man named Cole Hargrove. Cole was 32 years old. He was not tall. He stood at about 5 feet 10, which was average. He had short brown hair, a square jaw, and brown eyes that did not give much away. He was lean, but not large. When he walked into a room, most people did not notice him right away. He was the kind of man who could stand in a corner and simply disappear. Not because he was trying to hide, just because there was nothing about him that demanded attention. He had served 8 years in the United Earth Defense Corps. He had been in 3 separate combat deployments. He had trained other soldiers in close-quarters combat for 2 of those years. He did not talk about any of this unless someone asked. Nobody on the station had asked yet. The alien species at Concordia were all different in shape and size. The Harani were small and gray with wide black eyes. The Dulvan were tall and thin with pale blue skin. The Shet were insect-like and communicated through vibration. Each group had its own way of moving, speaking, and thinking. The humans watched them all carefully and tried to be respectful. But the ones that everyone watched most carefully were the Vethkari. The Vethkari were reptilian. That was the word most humans used, though it was not quite right. They had scales, yes, and they moved with a cold, fluid grace that reminded people of large predators. But they were also warm. They generated their own heat. Their eyes were yellow with vertical black pupils. Their fingers ended in flat, hardened points. And they were enormous. The shortest of the Vethkari delegations stood just under 8 feet tall. The tallest, their champion, stood close to 9. Her name was Sarah Khan. She was not the head of the Vethkari delegation. That was an older male named Vethkor, who was diplomatic and careful, and chose his words like a man who had been doing this for a long time. Sarah Khan was something else. She was what the Vethkari called a Kel champion. In their culture, every important group brought one. She was the fighter, the proof, the living argument that the Vethkari were not to be taken lightly. She wore no armor inside the station, only fitted dark clothing that showed the shape of her body, and the shape of her body was extraordinary. The muscles under her scales were not the same as human muscles. They were denser, more tightly packed, built over millions of years of evolution on a planet with heavier gravity. She moved like something that had never, not once in its life, felt afraid. The formal reception dinner on the 3rd week of talks was meant to be a relaxed event. The idea was that the 7 delegations would eat, drink whatever they each drank, and speak casually, build some goodwill. The ambassador for the humans, a woman named Dana Briggs, had worked hard to arrange it. She was 61 years old, with silver hair and a sharp mind, and she believed strongly that relationships between civilizations were built in small moments as much as in formal sessions. For the first hour, it went well. The Harani exchanged careful pleasantries with the dolphin. The human scientists talked to the shed advisors through translation devices. Vethkor moved through the room like a professional, saying the right things to the right people. But Sora did not do small talk. She stood near the back of the room, tall and still, watching everything. Her yellow eyes moved slowly across the crowd. At one point, they landed on Cole, who was standing near a wall with a glass of water, watching the room the same way she was. The two of them made eye contact for a moment, and neither one looked away first. Then, Sora looked elsewhere. The incident happened 40 minutes into the dinner. One of the younger human advisors, a man named Pete Drew, had moved through the crowd a little too quickly, and accidentally stepped into the path of Sora. He had not touched her. He had simply passed close. But in Vethkari's social code, passing in front of a Kel champion without lowering your eyes was a sign of either deep disrespect or a challenge. Pete Drew did not know this. He had kept his eyes up because he was looking at someone across the room. Sora did not react violently. She was too composed for that. But she turned her full attention to the human delegation, and something in her posture changed. The room felt it before anyone understood it. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. She spoke in Vethkari, and the translation came through a moment later. "Your people send soft things to these talks," she said. Her voice was low and even, like a sound that did not need to rise to be heard. "I have been watching this one." She pointed at Cole. Not Pete Drew, who had done the accidental offense. Cole. She had been watching him for reasons no one had asked about yet. "He carries himself like a fighter, but he looks like something that would break." No one in the room said anything. She continued. "In my culture, we do not decide respect in meeting rooms. We do not decide it with words." She paused for a moment. "I am issuing a Keldar, a formal challenge, one of my choosing against one of yours. No weapons, no armor, hands only." She looked directly at Cole. "I choose this one, the quiet one." Dana Briggs stepped forward immediately. She began to speak, measured and calm, about protocol and alternatives. But Cole had already put down his glass. He looked at Sora. She was nearly 3 feet taller than him. She could probably break a steel beam with her hands. The entire room was watching him. "All right," he said. "Just that. One word, no performance, no hesitation." Sora looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned away, as if the matter was already settled, and the outcome already known. The dinner ended shortly after. Nobody felt like eating. The alien fighter demanded a duel with a human, but what happened next quieted her. The night after the dinner was long and uncomfortable for the human delegation. Dana Briggs called everyone into the main conference room at the back of their assigned quarters. It was a plain room with a long table, white lights, and a screen on the wall that nobody had turned on yet. She stood at the head of the table with her arms crossed and her expression tight. She was not angry exactly. She was the kind of person who turned worry into focus. And right now, she was very focused. Cole sat at the far end of the table. His glass of water from the dinner was still in his hand. He had carried it all the way back without thinking about it. "I want to be clear," Dana said, looking at him directly, "that nobody in this room expects you to go through with this." "I know," Cole said. "The Keldar is a formal challenge, but it is not legally binding under Coalition protocol. We can decline. We can frame it as a cultural misunderstanding. We can offer an alternative, a symbolic gesture, something that satisfies their tradition without putting a person in a room with that." She stopped herself. "With Sora." Cole nodded slowly. "And if we decline?" Dana was quiet for a moment. "It complicates things. The Vethkari take refusal seriously. It would not end the talks, but it would put us at a disadvantage in the sessions. They would see it as confirmation of what they already think about us. Which is what? Cole asked. Pete Drew, sitting 2 seats down, looked at the table. He still felt responsible for the whole thing. He had not stopped apologizing since they got back to their quarters, and Cole had told him 3 times to stop. Dana answered carefully. That we are the weakest delegation here, that we are soft, that if the coalition ever needs to act on something difficult, the humans will be the ones who hesitate. The room was quiet. Dr. Paige Ellery was sitting to Dana's left, with a tablet in front of her. She was the delegation's science officer, young for her position, only 29, with short red hair and the kind of eyes that were always reading something, even when she was just looking at a wall. She had spent the last 2 hours pulling every piece of available data on the Vethkari that the Corps had on file. "Can I show you something?" she said. Nobody stopped her, so she turned on the screen. What came up was a biological breakdown of Vethkari physiology. Not a simple summary, a full technical profile. Bone density, muscle composition, nerve response times, cardiovascular output. Paige walked through it in plain language, the way she always did when she was trying to make something complicated easy to understand. The numbers were not good. Sorokhan specifically had been profiled during a previous diplomatic event 3 years earlier. Her muscle-to-frame density ratio was approximately 4 times that of a peak human male. Her grip strength had been estimated at over 800 pounds. Her reflex response time in combat drills was nearly twice as fast as a trained human soldier. Her skin, the scales, were not as hard as armor, but they distributed impact in a way that made blunt force significantly less effective than it would be against a human body. One of the other advisors at the table let out a slow breath. Paige kept going. On paper, a direct physical contest between a human and a Vethkari Kel champion looks like a very short fight. They are built for this. Their entire biology developed in a high-gravity environment where the things trying to eat them were also large. They are not just strong, they are efficient. They waste almost no energy when they move. She looked at Cole. I am not saying this to discourage you. I am saying it so you understand what you would be walking into. Cole looked at the screen for a moment. Then he asked his question. Does she fight the way her people always fight? Paige blinked. What do you mean? Their combat style, their doctrine. Has it changed? Paige looked at her tablet, scrolled, read. She took a moment before she answered. No, Vethkari unarmed combat has been mostly consistent for around 600 years. It is based on dominance through force. Their style assumes the fighter is the most powerful thing in the room. It doesn't really account for. She paused. For what? Dana asked. For someone smaller. Someone who's not trying to match them. Cole put down his water glass. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at Dana. I would like to sleep on it, he said. I will give you my answer in the morning. Dana held his gaze. She wanted to say more. She was a woman who always had more to say. But something in the way Cole sat, quiet, steady, not tense at all, made her close her mouth and nod. The meeting ended. People filtered out slowly, speaking in low voices. Pete Drew paused beside Cole on the way out and started to say something. Cole looked at him calmly and said, Pete, stop. It was not your fault. Pete opened his mouth. It really was not, Cole said again, more gently. Pete nodded and left. Cole stayed in the room alone for a while. On the other side of the station, in the Vethkari quarters, the atmosphere was different. There were no worried voices, no screens full of data, no quiet anxiety. The Vethkari did not prepare for duels the way humans prepared for problems. They prepared the way people prepare for something they already know the ending to. Sorokhan stood in the center of her personal space, which she had cleared of furniture. She was moving through a slow combat form, a series of precise movements that she had practiced 10,000 times. Each position flowed into the next without hesitation. It was something between exercise and ritual. Her honor second, a younger warrior named Vel, sat near the door watching her. Vel was 19 years old in human terms, and had grown up hearing stories about Sorokan's fights, the way other Vethkari children heard stories about ancient heroes. But he was also observant, and he had a habit of noticing things that others did not. "You watched the human for a long time tonight," Vel said. Sorokan did not stop moving. "I watch everything." "You watched him more than the others." She paused briefly between two positions. He was still. Most humans move constantly when they are uncomfortable. Small movements. They adjust, they shift, they look around. He did not. He just watched. Vel considered this. "Does that change anything?" "No," Sorokan said. She moved into the next position, her arm extending with smooth, total control. Stillness is not strength. It is just stillness. Vel did not argue, but later, when Sorokan had finished her form and gone to rest, he sat alone by the small window that looked out at the stars. He thought about what she had said. He thought about the human's face when he accepted the challenge. No excitement, no fear, no performance. Just the word. "All right?" Vel was not sure why, but that one word sat in his mind and would not leave. Across the station, in his small bunk, Cole was wrapping his hands. He did it slowly, the way he always did before sleep when something was coming. Strip over strip, knuckle to wrist, tight but not cutting. He had done it so many times that his hands knew the motion without being told. He stared at the ceiling for a while. Then he closed his eyes. He did not look afraid. He did not look brave either. He looked like a man who had already made a quiet decision and was simply waiting for morning. The alien fighter demanded a duel with a human, but what happened next quieted her. Cole told Dana his answer at breakfast the next morning. He was going to do it. Dana put down her coffee and looked at him for a long moment. She had known soldiers before. She had worked with the Defense Corps for over 20 years as a diplomat. She knew the difference between a man who was being reckless and a man who had made a careful decision. Cole looked like the second kind. She did not argue. She simply asked him what he needed. He said he needed the room layout, the floor material, and one more conversation with Paige. Paige met him in the science room an hour later. She had the Vethkari file open again. Cole sat across from her and asked her to walk him through the physical profile one more time. Not the numbers, but the specifics. Where did Vethkari carry their weight when they stood? How did they position their feet when they moved forward? What were the joints like? Were they built the same as human joints or different? Paige answered everything carefully. She pulled up skeletal diagrams. She showed him where the Vethkari elbow sat differently from a human one, rotating on a slightly different axis. She showed him the nerve cluster maps that the corpse had built from medical exchanges with other species. She pointed to 2 spots along the Vethkari forearm and one along the jaw ridge that were known pressure points. Not deadly, but sensitive. Painful, if hit correctly. Cole looked at all of it and said very little. He asked 2 or 3 short questions. Then he thanked her and left. Paige sat alone in the room after he was gone and stared at the diagrams on her screen. She had done everything she could. She had given him everything the Data had. But Data was not the same as a 9-foot reptilian warrior who had never lost a fight. She turned off the screen and went to find Dana. The duel was scheduled for the following afternoon. The central forum of Concordia was the largest open space on the station. It was used for formal ceremonies and large meetings. The floor was a flat gray composite material, firm and slightly textured, not slippery. The ceiling was high. Around the edges of the open floor, there were tiered observation rings, wide curved steps where people could stand and watch. By the time the afternoon came, every one of those steps was full. All 7 delegations were present. It was not required, but nobody had stayed away. The Harani stood close together near the left side, their wide eyes moving quickly. The dolphins stood very still on the right, the Shet clustered near the back, their translator devices humming softly. The other two delegations filled the remaining spaces. Every alien on the station had come to see this. Dana Briggs stood in the human section of the observation ring, with Paige beside her and the rest of the delegation behind them. Her face was calm in the way that experienced diplomats learn to make their faces calm even when they are not. Paige was holding her tablet but not looking at it. The Vethkari entered first. Sorakan came through the far door, with Vel walking 2 steps behind her. She wore close-fitted dark clothing, nothing ceremonial. She did not need ceremony. Her presence was already its own announcement. She walked to the center of the floor and stood there without looking around, without acknowledging the crowd. She was completely still. Then Cole walked in from the other side. He was wearing standard corps training clothes, gray shirt, dark trousers, flat-soled shoes. He had wrapped his hands again, thin strips of cloth over the knuckles, the way fighters do. He walked at an even pace, not fast, not slow. When he reached the center of the floor, he stopped a few meters from Sorakan and looked up at her. She looked down at him. Up close, the size difference was striking. Sorakan was not just tall, she was wide and thick and solid in a way that made Cole look genuinely small beside her. Several of the alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in the observation rings. A few of the Harani looked at each other. Cole gave a small nod. It was not a bow exactly, just an acknowledgement. Sorakan said nothing. She rolled her neck once, slowly, and raised her hands. The signal was given, and the fight began. For the first several seconds, Sorakan did not move. She watched Cole. Cole moved to his left, slow and careful, keeping distance, watching her feet. Then she came forward. The first strike came fast, faster than most people in the room were ready for. Sorakan drove a short forward push at Cole's shoulder, not a full strike, a testing one, and it connected. Cole went sliding back across the floor several feet before he caught himself. A low sound moved through the crowd. He came back in without pausing. She hit him again, a sweeping movement of her forearm, and this time Cole ducked under part of it, but still caught the outer edge across his upper back. He went down to one knee. The Harani delegates flinched. Dana Briggs pressed her lips together and did not look away. Cole stood back up. That was the moment things began to change, though most of the crowd did not understand it yet. He had stopped trying to stay away from her. He moved in close, inside the range where her longer arms had the most power. Sorakan adjusted and drove a downward strike at his collarbone. Cole turned his body so the blow hit his shoulder instead, angled away, and in the same movement he got both his hands onto her forearm and pulled it downward and across, turning her own momentum against her. She did not fall. She was too heavy and too strong for that, but she had to step sideways to correct herself, and for just a moment she was off-center. Cole moved to her side and hit the pressure point on her forearm twice, fast and hard with his knuckle, exactly where Paige had shown him. Sorakan made a short sound. Not pain exactly, something more like surprise. The crowd had gone very quiet. What came next was not clean or easy or exciting to watch in the way most fights are exciting. It was slow and grinding and very hard to follow. Pole did not try to knock her down. He kept getting close, tying up her arms, using his body weight and position to push her joints in directions they did not want to go. She broke free every time because she was simply stronger. But every time she broke free, she had to work for it. And every time she worked for it, Cole had already moved somewhere else and was doing something else she had not planned for. She hit him 3 more times, clearly. Once across the ribs, once on the side of his head, which dropped him to the floor for a moment. Once with a grip on his left arm that bent it badly and left it functioning at about half. The crowd expected him to stay down each time. He did not. She was still stronger. She was still faster. But she was also, for the first time in a very long time, confused. 11 minutes into the fight, Cole got her dominant arm. He had maneuvered her slowly across the floor. It had taken 6 minutes just for that, until she was positioned with her right side slightly forward. He dropped under her reach, wrapped both arms around her right elbow from below, and sat his entire body weight down on the joint in a compression lock. His feet planted against her leg for leverage. The angle was wrong for her. She could not rotate. She tried to lift him, but the lock tightened when she did. She tried to step backward, but the pressure increased. The only way out was to tear the joint apart, and she was not willing to do that yet. The room was completely silent. Sora Khan stayed completely still for a long moment. She was calculating. She was looking for the exit that was not there. Her yellow eyes moved slowly, thinking. Then she went still in a different way, a final way. Cole held the lock for 3 more seconds to be sure. Then he released it completely and stepped back. He stood up straight, his left arm hanging at a bad angle, blood on his lip, breathing hard. Sora Khan straightened up slowly. She turned and looked at Cole. Nobody in the room made a sound. The alien fighter demanded a duel with a human, but what happened next quieted her. The silence in the forum lasted a long time. It was not the silence that follows something expected. It was the silence that follows something that changes the way a room thinks. Every alien delegate standing in those observation rings had walked into the forum with a picture in their head of how this would go. Sora Khan would dominate. The human would fall. It would be over quickly, and the Vethkari would have made their point. That was the picture. And the picture was gone now, replaced by something none of them had words for yet. Sora Khan stood in the center of the floor and looked at Cole. Her yellow eyes were steady. Her face did not show what humans would call emotion. But there was something behind her eyes that had not been there before the fight. It was not quite respect yet. It was something earlier than respect. It was the look of a person who has just discovered that they were missing information. Cole stood a few meters away from her. His left arm was held slightly away from his body because bending it hurt. There was dried blood at the corner of his mouth. His gray shirt had a long dark mark across the ribs, where her forearm had caught him. He was breathing normally now, slow and even, the way trained fighters breathe after a hard bout. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at her. Then Sora Khan spoke. She spoke in Vethkari first, and the translation came a moment later through the room's system. Her voice was the same as it always was, low, even, unhurried. But the words were not what anyone expected. How, she said. Just that, one word, the same as his the night before. Cole understood what she was asking. She was not asking about technique. She was not asking for a lesson. She was asking something bigger. She was asking how a creature that small, that soft, that physically outmatched in every measurable way, had just done what he did. He thought about it for a moment. Then he answered her honestly, in plain language, the way he always talked. We were not always at the top, he said. Humans. For most of our history, we were not the biggest or the fastest or the strongest thing around. There were things on our planet that could kill us easily. Big things, fast things. We survived anyway. He paused. You learn things when you spend a long time being the smaller one. You learn how to use what you have. You learn how to take a hit and keep going. You learn that the fight is not always won by the one he hits hardest. Sora Khan listened. She did not interrupt, which for a Vethkari in a formal setting was itself something notable. Cole kept going. We have been fighting each other for thousands of years too. Not just animals. Each other. Humans against humans. Every size, every shape, every kind of terrain and condition. We built ways of fighting that work when you have nothing, when you are tired and hurt and the other person is bigger than you. Those ways got passed down, improved, combined. There are hundreds of different human fighting systems, and almost all of them have something in common. They were made for the person who could not afford to lose. He stopped. He looked at her steadily. We never forgot what it felt like to be prey. The room was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of many minds working at the same time. Sora Khan stood with that for a moment. Then she did something that Vel, watching from the side of the room, had never seen her do after a fight. She dipped her chin. It was small, barely a movement, but among the Vethkari, it meant something specific. It was what you did when you acknowledged that the other person had earned standing. Vel stood very still when he saw it. He felt something settle in his chest that he could not name. Up in the observation ring, Dana Briggs let out a long, slow breath. She had been holding herself very straight for the last 11 minutes, and now her shoulders came down slightly. Paige was beside her with her tablet still in her hand, forgotten. Paige was watching Cole the way a scientist watches something they want to understand better. He is bleeding, Paige said quietly. I know, Dana said. His arm is not right either, the left one. I know, Dana said again. He will go to the medical bay after. She paused. He won, Paige. Paige looked at her. I know. She stopped. She looked back down at the floor where Cole was standing. I gave him data, measurements, nerve maps, and what he actually did down there was... She shook her head, slowly. The data did not really cover it. Dana almost smiled. It rarely does. The other delegations began to move and speak quietly among themselves as the formal part of the duel ended and the room slowly returned to normal activity. The Harani left in a tight group, their translator devices clicking softly. The Dalvin representatives stood in place a little longer, watching. The Shet in the back were vibrating at a frequency that their own people understood as deep interest. Vel crossed the floor toward Cole, while Sorokan was speaking with Veth Kor near the far door. Vel was not as tall as Sorokan, only about 7.5 feet, but he was still large beside Cole. He stopped a respectful distance away and looked at him carefully, the way young people look at someone they have just reassessed. May I ask you something? Vel said. His translated voice was careful and a little formal. Go ahead, Cole said. The things you did, the positions. The way you used your body against her arm. Is that something humans teach? Is it a system, something with a name? Cole nodded. Several names. Depends on the system. But yes, we teach it. Soldiers learn a version of it. But it also exists in gyms and schools and communities. There are people who have trained in it for their whole lives and never been soldiers. Vel was quiet for a moment. All humans? Not all, but many. Most human cultures have something like it, some version of fighting that works for the smaller person. Vel looked at the floor, processing this. Then he looked up again. We did not know you were that old, he said. As a species, as a fighting culture, we knew your numbers, your history in years, but we did not understand what that much time of, he searched for the word, surviving, meant. Cole looked at him. There was something in Vel's face that was genuine, not performance, not politics, just a young person trying to understand something new. Most people don't, Cole said. He said it without bitterness, just as a fact. Vel nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to say more, but was not sure how. Finally he said, Sora Khan will not speak about this fight the way she speaks about others. Why not? Cole asked. Because the others she won, Vel said simply. This one she learned from. He gave a small formal gesture with his hand, something close to a bow, and walked back across the floor. Cole watched him go. Then he looked down at his left arm, rotated it carefully, winced, and decided it was time to find the medical bay. Dana caught up with him near the door. She walked beside him without saying anything for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be angry at you for doing that." "But," Cole said. "But I watched every second of it," she said. "And I think you knew what you were doing the whole time." Cole thought about that. "I knew what I was trying to do," he said. "It is not always the same thing." Dana looked at him sideways. "Close enough," she said. They walked out of the forum together, and behind them the room was still full of 7 civilizations, all quietly thinking the same thing, though none of them had put it into words yet. Humans were not what they had assumed, and assumptions, once broken, do not go back together the same way. The alien fighter demanded a duel with a human, but what happened next quieted her. The medical bay on Concordia was a small room near the middle of the station. It had 4 beds, clean white walls, and equipment that had been contributed by 3 different species. So some of it looked familiar, and some of it looked like nothing a human would have designed. There was one doctor assigned to the human delegation, a quiet man named Dr. Alan Cross, who had been a military medic for 12 years before moving into diplomatic service. He had set broken bones on 3 different planets and was not easily surprised. He was a little surprised when Cole walked in, not because of the injuries. The injuries were what he expected: a badly strained left elbow, 2 cracked ribs on the right side, a split lip, and heavy bruising across the upper back and shoulder. All serious, none of them dangerous. What surprised him was that Cole had walked in at all, instead of being carried. Alan worked quietly, checking each thing in order. Cole sat on the edge of the bed and let him. He did not complain. He answered questions when Alan asked them. When Alan pressed on the ribs and Cole's breath caught sharply, Cole just nodded and said, "Yeah, those are the ones." Alan wrapped the ribs, immobilized the elbow in a soft brace, cleaned the lip. The whole process took about 40 minutes. Near the end of it, the door opened and a Vethkari medic came in. She was shorter than most of the Vethkari delegation, about 7 feet, with darker scales and careful movements. She had a small case in her hands. Alan looked at her, she looked at him, then she looked at Cole. "Sorokhan sent me," she said through her translator. "She said you would need more than one kind of treatment." Alan raised an eyebrow. He was a practical man, so he simply asked what she had brought. She opened the case and showed him. There were 3 items inside: a kind of dense paste used on Vethkari muscle injuries, a thin cloth that held heat, and a small device that produced low vibration used to reduce deep tissue swelling. Alan examined all 3 carefully. He recognized the principle behind each one, even if the materials were unfamiliar. He nodded and stepped aside. The Vethkari medic worked in complete silence. She applied the paste along Cole's shoulder and upper back, where the worst bruising was, then wrapped the heat cloth over it. When she turned on the vibration device and held it near his ribs, Cole felt the deep ache there begin to reduce almost immediately. "Does the pain bother you?" she asked. Her tone was not cold. It was simply direct, the way Vethkari tended to be. Cole thought about it. "Yes," he said. She paused for just a moment. Then she continued working. Later, Alan would mention to Paige that the medic's hands had been slightly more gentle after that answer. Paige wrote it down. Cole stayed in the medical bay for 2 hours. When he came out, the station had changed in small ways that added up to something larger. The formal treaty sessions had been scheduled to resume the next morning, and people were preparing. But the preparation felt different now. The careful distance that had existed between the delegations, the polite coldness, the watching and measuring, had shifted. Not gone, but different, like a room where the temperature has changed and nobody has opened a window. Dana noticed it first, because noticing things was her job. She had spent the evening moving through the common areas of the station, talking to people, reading rooms the way she always did. What she found was that the other delegations were talking about humans more, and differently. Not loudly, not obviously, but in the way people talk when something has updated their understanding and they are still working through it. The HerHFY science team had requested access to the human delegation's public cultural files. They were specifically interested in the history of human combat systems. Dana approved the request immediately. Two of the Dolphin representatives had spent an hour with Paige, asking careful technical questions about human physiology and pain response. Paige had answered everything she could. At one point, one of the Dolphin asked, with genuine curiosity, whether it was true that humans continued functioning under levels of physical damage that would incapacitate most other known species. Paige had thought about how to answer that, and then said yes, to a significant degree, and that it was not considered extraordinary by humans themselves. The Dolphin had been quiet for a long time after that, and the HFY, specifically Vel, had asked Dana formally whether it would be appropriate to request a cultural exchange. Not a diplomatic exchange, not a trade discussion, a cultural one. He wanted to know if humans would be willing to share knowledge about their fighting history. Not as intelligence, not for military purposes, because he wanted to understand. Dana had said she would discuss it with her team. She already knew she would say yes. The treaty sessions began the next morning, and they moved better than any session had moved since the talks started. The HFY delegation listened more. They still spoke with authority and directness, because that was simply how they communicated. But the interruptions stopped. When the human delegation made a point, the HFY waited for it to finish. Sora Khan herself said very little across the 3 days of final sessions. She sat at the HFY table and watched, and occasionally spoke 1 or 2 sentences that carried weight simply because she so rarely spoke. HFY, the head of their delegation, seemed to take her silence as a kind of endorsement. When she did not object, he moved forward. It made the HFY negotiating position more flexible than it had been before. On the second day of sessions, there was a moment when one of the other delegations, not the HFY, one of the smaller ones that had been quietly difficult throughout the whole process, pushed back on a human proposal in a way that was meant to be dismissive. The room waited. Sora Khan turned her head slowly and looked at the delegation that had spoken. She said nothing. She just looked at them. They did not push back again. Dana did not smile, but her eyes did, briefly. The coalition treaty was signed on the 3rd day. Every representative put their mark on it in their own way. A signature, a pressed seal, a vibration pattern, a claw mark in formal ink. Cole was not in the room when it happened. He was in the corridor outside, standing by the observation window, watching the stars through the thick glass. He heard the sound of the room when it was done. A collective sound. Not quite a cheer. More like a long exhale from 7 species all at once. Something that had been held for a long time, released. Footsteps came up behind him. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that he recognized without turning around. Sora Khan stopped beside him. She stood close enough to the window that her reflection was visible in the glass beside his. The difference in their heights was clear, even in the reflection. She looked out at the stars and said nothing for a while. Cole waited. He was good at waiting. Her translated voice was low and even, as always. Cole nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "We get that a lot." Sora Khan looked out at the stars for another long moment. Then something in her posture changed. It was very small, easy to miss. Her shoulders, which had never once dropped in the entire time she had been on the station, came down just slightly. Not weakness, not softness, just ease, the kind that comes when something has been resolved. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. They stood there together for a while, the human and the HFY champion, both looking out at the same stars, in the same silence, in the way that people stand when they have found something close to understanding. Outside the window, the stars did not move. They never did. But Concordia turned slowly in the dark, the way it always had, carrying 7 civilizations inside it, all of them a little different now than they had been when they arrived. And somewhere in the medical bay, the Vethkari medic's paste was still doing its work, quiet and steady and sure, the way good things usually do.